With that, I'm so excited to introduce our guest. You may know Stephanie Cutter from the campaign's Truth Team videos throughout 2012. She was the deputy campaign manager for the president's re-election campaign and now serves on the Organizing for Action Board of Directors. Stephanie brings years of experience in Democratic politics, including with former President Clinton and the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Stephanie is going to talk us through the president's plan to prevent gun violence. And then we'll answer some of your questions. So again, please make sure you send them to questions@TheObamaDiary.com. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the phone with us tonight.
Great. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to everyone for hopping on the call tonight. It's a real pleasure to be with you. It's been more than 2 months since Newtown, and this is certainly not the first time that this country has debated how to reduce gun violence, but this time feels a little different. Right now, an overwhelming majority of Americans, including Americans who proudly support their right to bear arms in the Second Amendment, have come together around some common sense reforms. Senators from both parties are working on tough new laws to prevent people from buying guns for resale to criminals. Police chiefs are asking Congress to do something to get weapons of war, assault weapons, and massive ammunition magazines off the streets. President Obama has already signed 23 executive actions in the wake of Newtown, and this includes strengthening background checks, directing the CDC for the first time ever to study the best ways to reduce gun violence. President Obama is helping schools develop emergency plans and hire more officers if they want them. He's making sure mental health professionals know their options for reporting threats of violence. But none of these actions infringe on a law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun. All of them help to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and keep our kids safe. But executive actions alone aren't enough. More than 1,900 Americans, including more than 100 children and teenagers, have been killed since Newtown. The president has made reforming our nation's gun laws a priority for his second term. You saw him speak about it at the State of the Union, and he's spoken on it many times since. His plan includes 4 components: closing background check loopholes, banning military-style assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, making our schools safer, and increasing access to mental health services. Those are the 4 components. For tonight, however, and for the day of action on Friday, we're going to focus on the first component, which is closing background check loopholes. President Obama believes Congress should require a universal background check for anyone trying to buy a gun, anyone. More than 70% of NRA members agree with him, and it's time for Congress to act on this. But what exactly can Congress do to make our background checks universal? Currently, 40% of gun sales are conducted by private sellers who aren't required by federal law to run background checks on those that they sell to. This exemption is currently referred to as the gun show loophole, and is something that Congress can take action on and close. The president understands there will be times when exemptions still make sense for these for the background checks, for things like transferring a firearm between generations. But closing this loophole is a common sense step that can be taken now to save lives and protect our communities. The president is doing his part in this issue by taking specific executive actions that encourage states and federal agencies alike to share the relevant records that can enhance background checks. Things like records of criminal history and of persons prohibited from owning guns for mental health reasons. But the president alone can't reform our laws to make background checks universal. This is why we're asking for your help on Friday and over the next several months to make sure your member of Congress knows that you and your community supports this change. Right now, this idea is being debated in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we're hopeful this will lead to a bill that the Senate will vote on next month, and then move on to the House of Representatives through a vote that will make universal background checks the law of the land. Later in this call, OFA staff will talk about ways you can take action on this. But first, I'd like to open it up for a couple of questions. And I just want to say, before we get to the questions, thank you for everything that you're doing. It's good to talk to everybody again, and we couldn't do this without you.
All right. So once again, you can submit your questions by email at questions@BarackObama.com. The first question is from Nancy in California. Nancy says, when talking about the issue, you don't say gun control, you say gun violence prevention. Why is that?
Well, that's a great question. The issue of guns generally and gun violence is deeply emotional. Whether you're for reforming our current laws, you've been impacted by gun violence, or you believe that gun laws are already too restrictive. it's very emotional. The term gun violence and gun violence prevention not only allows the emotional piece of this issue to carry through the political back and forth, because everybody has a piece of emotion at stake here, but also demonstrates that this isn't about controlling or taking away rights. This is not about taking away guns. It's making sure that they don't get into the hands of criminals or those that shouldn't be using them. We care about gun violence prevention because we care about the safety of our communities and our kids and our families, not because we want to interfere with responsible gun ownership. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. Our next question is from Carlos in Indiana. Carlos says, is there currently legislation on gun violence prevention in the House or Senate, and will reforms be passed as one bill or many small bills?
Yes, there is currently legislation that's before the Senate Judiciary Committee. We don't know just yet what that final bill or bills will look like. We're hoping that it's comprehensive, but we're hoping that the Judiciary Committee will finish its work in the next couple of weeks and send it to the Senate floor for a vote. So time is of the essence. If we want to impact what the Senate Judiciary Committee does and what happens on the Senate floor, we have to act now.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Edith in Georgia. Edith says, when planning events in our communities around gun violence prevention, who are the best validators that we can highlight through our events?
That's a great question, and I know lots of people on this call have great experience with this. As with any issue, the best validators are those who have a personal connection to the issue. So it's whether they've got expertise or they've got experience, anyone who has a story to tell that's connected to gun violence, whether it's protecting our children, educating our children, keeping our kids safe, parents, law enforcement, or victims of gun violence. In this case, a law enforcement official or an elected official in your town would be terrific, or perhaps a member of the faith community or a mother who've dealt personally with the issue of gun violence. You shouldn't be afraid to think about what we call strange bedfellows, so people who you wouldn't expect to speak out on the issue but are compelled to do so by their experience with it. For instance, lots of NRA members out there believed in universal background checks. They'd be great spokespeople if you happen to know anybody, or if you happen to be one. People who have experience with gun ownership, generally, even if they're not an NRA member, would be great spokespeople. So, anybody who has a personal connection to the issue, whether it's protecting people, raising kids, teaching kids, counseling children and adults, or gun owners, all of these people would be great spokespeople, people to host events on the ground.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it looks like we have a ton of questions coming in. Do you have time for two more?
Sure.
Fantastic. This question is from Sandra. We don't have Sandra's state. When do we expect the House Gun Violence Prevention Task Force to have a report? Or do you know any additional details on that?
I don't have any additional details on the timing of it, but knowing how Washington works, I guarantee you once the Senate takes action or something starts moving through the Senate Judiciary Committee, the House won't be far behind. So just to reiterate what I said earlier, the time is now if we want to impact what's happening in the House and Senate, if we want to demand action. You know, if you remember back to what the President said in the State of the Union, is just bring it to a vote. These people deserve a vote. And he's doing that for a reason, because House Republican leadership would like to sit on this and not move anything. And certain members of the Senate, Republican leadership in the Senate, would like to block a vote. But the more we can mobilize people across the country, make sure that everybody's voices are being heard, we can actually impact what both the House and the Senate move on. So I don't know when the House will take action on or report out on the task force, but I do know the Senate is likely to do this in the next month, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and hopefully bring it to the floor soon thereafter.
All right, the next question is from Pam St. Clair, and she says, is there any way of knowing what members of Congress are receiving contributions from the National Rifle Association?
Yes, there is. All of that information is reportable on the FEC website. But the other thing that you can do is go to the NRA website and look at everybody's NRA ratings. They score people from A to F. And if somebody's getting an A, B, or C, you can guarantee that whether they're taking money or they've voted in support of the NRA agenda, it gives you a good assessment of where that member stands on the issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us tonight, Stephanie. We appreciate all you do and all you will continue to do.